You're listening to the Men's Dating Mastery Podcast with host Alec Chase, bringing you the experts in dating, sex, and relationships.
Welcome back to MDM, guys. We have been talking a lot about sex lately. In episode 7, we had sexologist Dr. Stephen DeWitt on to help you understand your sexual blueprint. Then, in episode 10, we were speaking with Dr. Nicole Prause about the science behind porn consumption. And then the last 2 episodes featured sex coach Jim Benson, who spoke about the how-tos of sex. Today, we're going to round out that conversation by speaking about sex in the context of long-term relationships before moving on to other topics. My guest in this episode is social psychologist Dr. Amy Muse, and our conversation is dedicated to keeping the sexual spark alive over the long term. This is a key focus area of Dr. Muse's research, so she has a lot of insights to share on the topic. I hope you enjoy the conversation. And if you do, then please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Now here's Dr. Muse. Hi, Amy. Thanks so much for being with me.
Thanks for having me.
To kick it off, can you briefly introduce yourself and what kind of work you do?
Sure. So my name's Amy Muse. I have a PhD in social psychology, and right now I'm a postdoc at the University of Toronto, Mississauga. And what I mainly do is study sexuality in the context of romantic relationships. And I'm particularly interested in how people can maintain sexual desire over time in their relationships, and then the factors that might link to satisfaction in relationships over the course of time.
Excellent. So I would like to start by jumping right at the heart of some of your research. And that's by talking about these concepts that you describe as communal and exchange relationships. So can you provide just kind of a layman's explanation as to what they are, how they're related to sex in the context of long-term relationships, and what role do they play?
Sure. So there's a long history of work on communal and exchange relationships in the context of relationships more broadly. So not specific to sex and not specific to romantic relationships. So basically, a communal relationship is when partners are motivated to meet each other's needs as these needs arrived. So you're sort of motivated to give benefits to a partner without this expectation of direct reciprocation. Whereas an exchange relationship is more about this idea of tit for tat. So I'll do something for you that you want if you do something similar for me in return. And so we often think of exchange relationships as more business sort of oriented. You know, someone provides a service and you pay them the appropriate amount of money. But communal relationships are a lot more based around giving care to each other and not so concerned about what you're getting back in return. So what we recently did, me and a few of my colleagues, is we extended these ideas of a communal relationship, so this giving based on need, to the domain of sexuality, because we were curious if some of these findings that were in the past research about communal relationships having a number of benefits would extend to sex. And so what we found was that people who are more, and we call sort of our term sexual communal strength, and people who are higher in sexual communal strength are more motivated to meet their partner's sexual needs, and they do so without this expectation of direct reciprocation. So they sort of pay attention to what their partner might need or be interested in, and they tend to be motivated to give those types of benefits to their partner. And we found that basically this was beneficial, not only for the partner who's sort of receiving these benefits, which might seem fairly intuitive, but also for the person that's doing the giving. So the person that's high in sexual communal strength seemed to reap a number of benefits for their relationship, such as feeling more satisfied, enjoying their sex life more, and even maintaining higher levels of desire over time when they sort of approach their sexual relationship with this more communal orientation.
Okay, so it sounds like altruistic behavior not only helps your partner, but is also self-serving in a way.
Yeah, you do seem to reap benefits from giving. And we know that from, a long history of social psychology work that suggests that, giving feels good to people. And we sort of were able to apply this to the domain of sexuality and found something similar.
Okay, and just to give a couple of very simple examples of how might this play out with sex in the context of a long-term relationship. We're saying one partner says they might not be in the mood, but they know that their other partner is really desiring sex at the moment. They might go ahead and have sex with them anyway.
Yes, that's probably the most common way. We asked people about this once, what they might do to meet their partner's sexual needs. So we have a bunch of open ended responses. So there's a number of different things, but I would say the most common was having sex with your partner when maybe it's not personally desired for you. Other examples might be engaging in a sexual activity that your partner really enjoys, but maybe it's not quite your favorite. So a certain sexual position or something that your partner likes to do. So there was a number of different things, and I think each couple might have sort of their own things that they may negotiate in their sexual relationship, but frequency and engaging in sex when you maybe weren't particularly in the mood is a common one.
Right. And when we're talking about a communal exchange, there are two types of approaches that you speak about. One are called approach goals and one are avoidance goals. And they seem to have very different results on the quality of that relationships depending on which you take. So can you explain what they are and how that works?
Yeah, so basically what we're getting at with these is people's reasons for engaging in sex. So why are you having sex with your partner? And there's potentially, hundreds of reasons why people might be having sex, but one way that we've categorized them is in these approach and avoidance goals. So approach goals are when you're having sex with your partner to pursue a positive outcome. So it might be to feel closer to your partner or to make them happy or to enhance the intimacy in your relationship. You could also be having sex for avoidance goals. So you want to avoid feeling guilty. You want to avoid conflict in your relationship, or you want to avoid having your partner be upset. And what we find is that engaging in sex for more approach motivated reasons tend to be beneficial for relationships. So even if maybe you're not particularly in the mood to engage in sex, if you're having sex to pursue benefits for your partner, to enhance intimacy in your relationship, then you seem to be benefiting. So meaning you enjoy the sex more and you feel more satisfied with your relationship.
Right. There was actually a really nice example that I came across in, I believe it was the Walrus paper, and this particular article spoke about your research specifically. And the example that it gave is, let me see if I can find it because I jotted it down. So when people were told to think about having a good time with the person that they're about to meet, they report a better experience than people trying to avoid having a bad time and making a poor impression. So basically what it's saying is that if two people are meeting for the first time, if they take what you call an approach goal and focus on having a great time with that person, they're more likely to enjoy the experience versus, somebody that's thinking, oh, this is going to be a lousy time and how can I mitigate that? And therefore having an avoidance goal and therefore probably not having a great time with them. You're saying that same kind of attitude can translate into sex within a relationship.
Absolutely. And that is actually from a study that was conducted more focused on these goals sort of in a social interaction sense. And we find very similar things when we think about approaches to sex. So, yeah, focusing on what you're going to enjoy about the experience does seem to lead you to have a better time, whereas sort of trying to avoid these bad things leads to a worse experience, definitely.
Yeah, it makes me think of the power of positive thinking that we're all talking about these days.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So here's a thought that I had. In a situation when one partner is maybe desiring sex and the other one isn't, and out of altruism, the person with the least desire chooses to satisfy or chooses to meet the partner that is wanting sex where they're at. The concern that I might have in a situation like that is when somebody's having sex with you out of a sense of obligation or like they're doing a favor rather than out of genuine desire, I'm not sure how that might play out. So could such behavior do more harm than good? Might it breed resentment in the partner that's being the altruist in this kind of situation? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. One thing I'd like to point out is that, over time in relationships, it's unlikely that partners are always going to have the exact same level of desire at the very same time. So if you want to maintain your sexual relationship, if one of your goals with your partner is to engage in sex, on a regular basis, then there's likely going to be times when one person is sort of more in the mood for sex than the other person. But I do think that your motivations matter a lot here. So if there's a desire discrepancy and you're sort of approaching it from this more avoidance mindset, so, oh, I can tell my partner's in the mood for sex, I might as well just do it so, I don't upset them or I avoid having a big fight or whatever. It's just easier. If you sort of go into it with that mindset, absolutely, you could end up feeling resentful and your partner could pick up on this. So the other thing about the work that we've done is we know that these benefits aren't just for the person who has whose reasons they are for engaging in sex. It's also for the partner. So our partners are picking up on why we're doing things. And so even if one person's not particularly in the mood, but they think, I want to enhance intimacy with my partner. I want to feel closer to them. I know it'll make them feel really loved and desired if we engage in sex tonight. I'm not totally in the mood, but I think I could engage in sex with my partner and sort of get there and we could have a good time. And I think that if you're approaching it like that, then it's likely going to have benefits for both you and for your partner because they're going to sense this more approach-focused mind frame. But if you're sort of going into it begrudgingly, then the partner's also likely to pick up on that as well, and feel worse as a result. So I think that the approach avoidance distinction is very important for that question.
Okay, so it sounds like there are two pieces at play here. One is having the approach goal mindset, which you just said, but the other one is chances are that level of desire is going to fluctuate from one partner to the other. So it'd be one partner kind of satisfying the needs of one, and then that might reverse at another time. So over the long term, we're really talking about a relationship that's built on basically both partners wanting to make each other happy. And so I was about to use the word exchange, but I guess communal.
Right. And that is important because this idea of communal, I said before that, you're motivated to meet your partner's sexual needs without this expectation of direct reciprocation. So while you don't expect that, you do expect that your partner is also going to be motivated to meet your needs. The difference with communal is that one partner might have different needs at different times. So it's not always going to be sort of this tit for tat situation. So there might be times in a relationship where one partner, isn't really feeling in the mood for sex for whatever reason. Maybe they have a new baby or going through some kind of life transition. And so a person should also be understanding of, a partner's need not to have sex. And there might be other times when one person is in the mood and the other person's not feeling particularly high desire, but you might think that it's important for that person to make them feel sort of loved and desired by you. So yeah, definitely, it's not so much a direct reciprocation, but you would expect that your partner's also motivated to meet your needs in return.
Yeah, and I imagine what might be at play here is whose needs are stronger at the time. So, one partner's desire for sex might not necessarily outweigh the other partner's need to just sit this one out, right? Depending on what's going on in each one of their lives.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what this theory would suggest, that it really should be based on sort of whose need is stronger. And so that might sort of shift over time. Sometimes it might just be, not possible for us to engage in sex with our partners, or it might be a place where if we did, we would feel resentful. And so at times it might be good to, accept that partner's need not to engage in sex. I think that's an important piece of it. But yeah, I think that it should be about paying attention to the needs and as they shift and change over time.
Right. So far we're talking about partners whose sexual needs might go up and down over time for both of them. What if we were to imagine a scenario, and I don't know how common these are, but I know that they exist, and that's where two partners are in a relationship, maybe a marriage, who have very different libidos. So one might have, for example, a very high sex drive, the other one not so much. And I imagine then in that situation, we might get into a situation where it's kind of like a one-way street, where one's partner's needs are always outweighing the others. And so it might be the case that the person with the lower needs is always accommodating the others. Would this still hold up? Would a communal relationship, even if it is based on an approach goal mindset, work in this situation where it's always one directional like this?
Yeah, it's a good question. So we recently looked at something similar in a new paper, and you're talking about sort of a situation where partners have more chronic discrepancies in their desire. So one partner is clearly the high desire partner, another partner is clearly the low desire partner. And this certainly happens. And I do believe that there's couples that have these desire discrepancies that are definitely struggling to find, how they're going to maintain their sexual connection. And there's other couples that might have these same discrepancies, but they may be managing it with more success. So the way that we looked at this, and we didn't look necessarily at people with these chronic discrepancies. Instead, we asked people about sort of situations where your partner is interested in having sex, so your partner's desire is high, but your own personal desire for sex is low. And we actually found that people who take on this communal approach to their sex lives were able to still benefit and maintain their satisfaction when engaging in sex in these situations. So it would still be good for us to look at these strategies in couples who do have these more chronic desire discrepancies, because doing something over time, it could change. But it seemed like if you come into it with a communal approach, you could maintain satisfaction in your relationship by engaging in sex for these more approach motivated reasons. So to pursue benefits for your partner. So it did seem like these approaches to sex could work even in these situations where you're the low desire partner. Now, what I think would be important though here is that although you will be motivated to meet your partner's needs sometimes, it'll be important for the higher desire partner to also accept that the lower desire partner may not always be interested in accommodating their needs. So at times they accept that the partner's not in the mood for sex. And I think that that's where some of this reciprocity can pay off. So if it's clear in your relationship, one partner is the high desire partner and the other is the low, you probably have come to, if you're managing this successfully, you probably have come to some kind of compromise around your sexual frequency. So maybe you're not having sex quite as often as the high desire partner would like, but you're having it more often than the low desire partner would like. And if both people are sort of making these accommodations with this communal perspective in mind and focusing on these sort of approach reasons, either for doing or not doing whatever, then I think that couples could maintain satisfaction this way. There's still a lot of work to be done, but what we've done so far definitely suggests this.
Have you ever looked at couples who might have this kind of chronic discrepancy in their levels of sexual desire, and whether or not any of them have tried to fulfill their needs outside of the relationship? So for example, if there is a partner whose sexual drive significantly exceeds that of his partner, to go and at least partially meet those needs outside of the context of the relationship, but with the knowing and acceptance of his partner or her partner.
Right. It's a great question. We haven't looked at this particularly, but there are researchers out of the University of Michigan, Terry Conley and Amy Moores, that have studied consensual non-monogamy, which is what you're referring to here. And their research shows that anywhere between 5 and 10% of romantic couples practice consensual non-monogamy. So it certainly suggests that, yes, this is a strategy that some couples use, either for the reason that you're describing or for other reasons in their relationship. And actually, when I started doing this work on applying a communal approach to sexuality, I realized that it was very similar to this perspective that Dan Savage, who's a sex columnist, talks about. So he has this idea about being GGG, and what that means is being good, giving, and game. So good and bad, sort of game for anything within reason, and giving in terms of, giving without expecting this direct reciprocation. So giving based on your partner's needs, which is really what this communal approach is. And he would definitely find, like in terms of his column and the people that write into him, that one way that people are GGG is, they might have some kind of non-monogamous agreement. If one partner has a certain desire that the other partner's not as into, or mismatched libidos, they might seek some sexual activity outside of their relationship. So I think it's definitely something that some couples do, and some do in this way that really works for them. So I think that's definitely a possibility if both partners are sort of into an agreement like that.
Okay. And I understand your research hasn't really focused on it, but I'm just curious if you have ever come across any information as to what kind of success rate these types of arrangements have over the long term, where partners are allowed to go outside of a relationship.
It's a good question. And I don't know the exact stats on this. I mean, we know that this isn't, I think that there's a lot of stigma around these relationships because we sort of, have this monogamy ideal. And definitely the research coming out of the University of Michigan suggests that people do sort of stigmatize couples who are in a consensual non-monogamous relationship, even when they're presented as, both comfortable with the agreement and both happy. And definitely the research shows that it's certainly possible to have a satisfying, healthy relationship that's consensually non-monogamous. Exactly how satisfaction of consensual non-monogamy couples compares to monogamous couples, I don't know. I think what would tell us more about this is people's motivation. So again, if people are doing this as a way to sort of meet each other's sexual needs and they're both doing it from this communal sort of approach perspective, it's likely to be more successful. But if you engage in this type of relationship just to avoid upsetting your partner or avoid conflict in your relationship, it's likely going to have negative consequences, just like engaging in sex for avoidance goals does. So I think that both partners' motivations for engaging in consensual non-monogamy are going to be linked to the outcomes.
So we're coming full circle. I like that.
Yeah.
Here's another one. And again, I don't know to what extent you've looked at this, so you don't have to speak about it too much, but I guess it's a two-part question. The first is obviously what's at the heart of this matter is ensuring that, as you put it, keeping the sexual spark alive in the context of a long-term relationship, because we all know that it's a general acceptance for a lot of people that, as people spend more years within a long-term relationship, possibly get married and have kids, sex seems to take a nosedive. So the two-part question is, one is, have you looked at what the reasons for this might be? Why does sex tend to take a hit in a long-term relationship?
Yeah, so we haven't looked at it specifically, but there is some research out there that suggests that, once your partner becomes more familiar to you and being with them is no longer, novel, that's one explanation for why desire might tend to decline over time. So I guess what interests me is that it seems like, in the beginning, in most relationships, it's a time of very high desire. So often couples in the first, few months or even few years don't tend to have as many issues with desire discrepancy. Normally you're really into the person. It's often what brings people together, right? Is this, sexual attraction and draw to each other. So often in the beginning, having desire for sex, it comes pretty easily. But then over time, we know that desire tends to decline and sexual frequency tends to decline somewhat as well. So as you said, as people get married, as they have kids, if they become more, co-parents, roommates, they have these other aspects of their relationship, sometimes sex can fall a bit to the wayside. So I guess that the interest in a lot of my research is what happens when you get to this point? Because we know that most couples still maintain some type of sexual connection. So sex is still important in the relationship, although maybe not quite as frequent or desirous as it is in the beginning. But it might be about shifting the perspective and shifting the expectations a little bit. So it might not, come as easy and as it did in the beginning. It might not be as hot and heavy as it was in those early months. But it certainly seems possible that maybe taking on some of these different approaches, you can maintain this desire for your partner over time and maintain that sexual connection with your partner. So that's sort of what motivates me to look into, these approach reasons for engaging in sex and this sort of communal approach to relationships, because it's a little bit different than just like, having this hot, heavy desire for the partner that tends to be characteristic of an early relationship.
Sounds like you're adding a little bit of depth to the conversation almost, because I suppose in the early stages, a lot of it might be driven by more carnal desires, lust, whereas what you're suggesting is something that's more deeply rooted in things like intimacy and affection and long-term care for your partner.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually what people report. When we ask people in longer term relationships about their reasons for engaging in sex with their partner, we get much higher rates of these sort of more intimate reasons. So to feel connected with my partner, to feel close to them, to enhance intimacy. I mean, people they still want to have sex to experience an orgasm or feel sexual pleasure, but these don't tend to be as strong of motivators in long-term relationships as sort of this more desire to be intimate and connected with your partner. So I definitely think that perhaps, it's just that there's some changes over time once our partner sort of becomes more familiar to us.
Right. And actually, when I started asking you my two-part question, you almost immediately touched on what was going to be my second part. And this is something that I've been trying to wrap my mind around, something I have a lot of curiosity around, and that's this concept of novelty and the fact that as humans, we seem to have this drive to seek out new things, new partners, new experiences. To what extent does this come up as an issue in long-term relationships? I mean, I know it comes up, but how big is it? Does it vary? Is it more of a thing for some people and not really a thing for others? What do we know about it?
It's a great question. It's actually something that I've been looking into recently. And so I haven't necessarily been calling it novelty, but I've been calling it something, or I've been drawing on theory that refers to it as self expansion. So, one of the other explanations for why desire is so high in an early relationship is that self expansion is high, meaning that your partner, this new person, is providing different opportunities for you to expand your sense of self, for you to expand your view of the world, giving you this sort of novel approach to things, introducing this novel perspective into your life. And that's one explanation for why desire is high in the relationship in the beginning. And then over time, your partner doesn't provide as much self expansion because you come to know them. So what they share with you, what you do together tends to be more familiar. But couples do find ways, even in the long term, to self expand. And this is one of the things that I've been interested in. So we actually asked people over the course of a 3-week study every day the level of self expansion each day and what specific activities partners might be engaging in to feel more self expanding. And we did find that when partners felt a broader sense of self, they did things with their partner that were self expanding, they were more likely to engage in sex and they felt more desire for their partners and they enjoyed the sexual experience that they had more. So it seems like this kind of idea of self expansion is linked to novelty because a lot of the activities that people do might be something new. So an example would be learning a new activity together. And sometimes this could be, something kind of wild and crazy, like, oh, we went bungee jumping together. But often it was, my partner taught me how to bake a cake, or we went to a salsa dance class, or something like that. So you did something with your partner that sort of, expanded your sense of self or gave you a new perspective on the world. And those situations where it sort of injected a little bit of novelty into the relationship seem to also be important for desire. So I definitely don't think that this idea of novelty completely loses relevance over time. It might just be you might have to work at it a little bit harder because you already know your partner. And so just knowing a lot of basic things about them isn't going to inject any sort of self expanding experience into your relationship. But if you actually seek out some of these opportunities, which some couples do, it does seem to have benefits for your relationship and your sex life as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. I've actually never heard that perspective. So what we're saying is we've got this drive for novelty that's within us, then rather than looking at our partner and looking to just replace them, we're saying seek out novelty with them. And I don't know if I'm stretching this, but one thing that people, or at least, I'm biased to think this way, is that one thing that people seek is personal growth. And so if you're with a partner that allows you to pursue that drive for personal growth, then perhaps it kind of scratches that novelty itch as well. I don't know. Am I stretching it, or
no, I don't
is there
think
validity
so.
to that?
This is really interesting because, what I learned from this research is that people came up with so many different activities that were self-expanding. So it's, as you mentioned before, there's going to be a lot of individual differences in this. But I think personal growth is sort of one of the key elements of this because people definitely even mentioned, when they spent time with, one of their children. And I think that why people thought this was self-expanding is because they sort of saw their partner in a different light. They saw them as a parent. And if this is sort of a new thing in your relationship, if you're a new parent, then that's sort of injecting in this bit of novelty. And I also think that a part of that is this idea of personal growth. So you're watching, someone interact with your partner interact with your child, and it might be sort of teaching you a new way to interact. So you're sort of growing as a person by, learning in a sense from your partner. So people definitely mentioned things like that. And there is some research about sort of supporting your partner's own self-expansion as being positive in the relationship. So this isn't linked to sexuality, but definitely that sort of being supportive of your partner, finding opportunities to self-expand. I mean, it's important that you do things together, but potentially also, your partner does self-expanding things on their own is also beneficial. So I definitely think personal growth is a part of it.
Great. We're kind of coming to an end here, so I'd like to ask you 2 final questions. If you could offer one piece of advice that people could use to improve their relationships in the context of the conversation we just had, what would you advise them?
Yeah, so thinking about, because my work is focused mainly on sexuality, I sort of have 2 main, I guess, pieces of advice, or maybe take-home messages is a better way to put it. The first thing is sort of about paying attention to and acknowledging your partner's needs. I don't think that you necessarily have to meet every single need that your partner has as you recognize it. But I think what can often happen in relationships is that we do notice these things about our partner. So, for example, you might notice that your partner seems like they're in the mood for sex, but you're not really personally in the mood for sex that night. So instead of acknowledging your partner's need and saying, oh, it seems like you're kind of interested in sex, maybe you don't want to engage in sex. So you say, I'm not really in the mood tonight, but maybe we could take a rain check, or maybe there's something else we could do, like some other kind of intimate activity that we'd both enjoy, something like that. Sometimes what we do instead is, we sort of turn over and pretend to be asleep, or, we might kind of pick a fight with our partner, or like just because we're trying to, we don't really feel like it and we don't really want to have to say that. So we sort of don't acknowledge that need of our partner. And I think it can go the other way. If a person initiates sex and you can sort of tell that your partner's not really in the mood, instead of maybe, moving forward with these different initiation attempts, you might just acknowledge like, oh, it doesn't really seem like you're in the mood. Is there anything I could do to get you in the mood? Like, do you want to do something to relax? Or, maybe we'll just have a rain check. And so I think that even if the need doesn't get met at that time, I think paying attention to and acknowledging a partner's needs is really important and probably goes a long way for satisfaction, as opposed to sort of ignoring them and putting your partner off. And the other thing is what we've sort of been talking about around these approach reasons for sex. So when I talk about some of that work, one of the things that I tend to say is that if you're somebody that, that you're kind of your motives for sex are more on the avoidance side, and you want to change that a bit, one thing I think that you can do is focus on the positive experiences of sex. So maybe if you find yourself not really being in the mood, you might start to think about, what would I enjoy if I were to engage in sex with my partner? I might like this sort of thing. I know it'll make me feel closer to my partner and I might enjoy that. So trying to focus on some of those positives. We haven't done the work on this specifically, but the evidence that we have so far suggests that this could enhance not only that sexual experience, but your relationship more broadly. So it's definitely something to think about, is why you're engaging in sex, and could you be more approach motivated?
Right. What I liked about the first part of that answer is that it's rooted in honesty, which is something that comes up in almost every single episode on your show. And that's being honest with where you're at, being honest with what your partner wants, and acknowledging it rather than playing your own game and not really acknowledging the reality of the situation. For the final question, is there anything you would like to share with the audience? Blog, website, social media, any studies you have going on?
Sure. So I occasionally write for this website called Science of Relationships, which is a great website. It's run and written for by academics. So basically, it's kind of what we've done today. It's bringing what's out there in the research and these journals that a lot of people don't read, bringing it sort of in a more accessible way. So if you're interested in relationships and how to maintain a satisfying relationship, it's a great website to check out. I also have a blog on Psychology Today called The Passion Paradox, and you can find out more about my research on my own website, which is www.amymuse.com.
Great. Thanks so much, Amy. Really enjoyed this conversation with you today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
There you have it. I hope this information helps you create better, more fulfilling relationships. As always, you can get in touch with me at alec@mensdatingmastery.com. That's Alec with a C. Or if you'd like to learn more about MDM, you can visit mensdatingmastery.com. And if you're enjoying the show, then please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review this podcast in iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and until next time.
Thank you for listening to Men's Dating Mastery, a podcast dedicated to improving the lives of men and the women around them.